Hello again. Welcome back to week 26 of year 5 of the Religious Education Initiative. This is day 3. We're continuing through the book of Acts. So, last time we saw Saints Paul and Barnabas rejected by the majority of the people in Antioch of Pisidia and Iconium, so that they left those places and went to Lystra and to Derbe. So this time we will see what they do there and how they make their way back to Antioch. If I'm not mistaken, Lystra and Derbe are further to the west, towards the western coast of Asia Minor. But I'll check that real quick. So Lystra it's still in central Anatolia. Let's see. So actually this is down. Lystra and Derbe are back towards the east. I'm glad I checked. So basically, St. Paul kind of went up on a loop and then back down, and then he's going to retrace his steps there. So, but Lystra is a little bit towards the coast and a little bit to the east, and Derbe is farther to the east. So anyway, in Lystra, this is chapter 14, verse 8. In Lystra there was a man sitting who could not use his feet and had never walked, for he had been crippled from birth. He listened to Paul as he was speaking, and Paul, looking at him intently and seeing that he had faith to be healed, said in a loud voice, "Stand upright on your feet." And the man sprang up and began to walk. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates. He and the crowds wanted to offer sacrifice. When the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of it, they tore their clothes and rushed out into the crowd, shouting, "Friends, why are you doing this? We are mortals just like you, and we bring you good news, that you should turn from these worthless things to the living God, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. In past generations he allowed all the nations to follow their own ways, yet he has not left himself without a witness in doing good, giving you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, and filling you with food and your hearts with joy." Even with all these words, they scarcely restrained the crowds from offering sacrifices to them. But Jews came there from Antioch and Iconium and dragged him out of the city, and came from Antioch and Iconium, and won over the crowds. Then they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing that he was dead. But when the disciples surrounded him, he got up and went into the city. The next day he went on with Barnabas to Derbe. After they had proclaimed the good news to that city and had made many disciples, they returned to Lystra, and then on to Iconium and Antioch. There they strengthened the souls of the disciples and encouraged them to continue in the faith, saying, "It is through many persecutions that we must enter the kingdom of God." And after they had appointed elders for them in each church, with prayer and fasting, they entrusted them to the Lord, in whom they had come to believe. Then they passed through Pisidia and came to Pamphylia. When they had spoken the word in Perga, they went down to Attalia. From there they sailed back to Antioch, where they had been commended to the grace of God for the work that they had completed. When they arrived, they called the church together and related all that God had done with them, and how he had opened a door of faith for the Gentiles. And they stayed there with the disciples for some time. So this is the end of the what's often referred to as St. Paul's first missionary journey. It's funny because I'm actually going to see if I can. No, I can't easily show this. But if you Google, what this looks like, Paul's first missionary journey, you see that he actually kind of winds his way around inside of Asia Minor for a bit. I'm not entirely and completely familiar with the geography of Anatolia, but I believe what's happening here is that you have the coastal cities of Asia Minor, of modern Turkey, and then if you go inland, you're going up onto a plateau, and it's not necessarily easy or obvious to get down again. So once he goes up to Antioch in Pisidia, then he goes further to the east to Iconium, then a little bit to the southwest to Lystra, and then east again to Derbe. So he's I think he's staying on the plateau, but in what is fairly mountainous areas throughout here. But I don't believe there's an easy and obvious route south, directly to the coast, which is why he kind of retraces his steps, goes back down to the coast at Perga, and then from there makes his way back to Antioch by sea. So this is not, if we're just looking at a map without seeing the natural geographical features, it can be a strange picture. If he's going to go back, why doesn't he just go back to Antioch? But this is actually what we see. He's not going straight back to Antioch in Syria. He's going back and visiting the communities, the places where he preached, where Christian communities have sprung up. So he teaches them, he ministers to them, he and Barnabas together. They appoint elders, which means they ordain clergy to lead those communities, and then they go back. So there's St. Paul is not just, a drive-through preacher. He doesn't just show up, say, hey, this is Jesus guy, and then he leaves. He's coming back, and he's building up and maintaining, the church community there. What happens in Lystra is a little strange, to say the least, because at first they want to worship Paul and Barnabas as gods, but by the end of the day, it seems, or the end of the episode, they've stoned them they've stoned Paul with stones, and are trying to kill him. So strange, to say the least. There's a backstory here that we need to understand. If I'm not mistaken, to the north of this region, which is Lycaonia, to the northeast is Cappadocia, but directly north is the old kingdom of Phrygia. And the story is that in Phrygia, this is a story in Ovid's Metamorphoses, so these are pagan stories about the gods. But Zeus and Hermes, the two gods that are mentioned here in the gospel, they visited a community there, and no one gave them hospitality. Everyone treated them badly. Except for this one elderly couple who brought them in and gave them a place to stay and fed them and protected them. So the next morning, it's almost kind of like a Sodom and Gomorrah story in a sense. Everyone who had rejected them is destroyed, is killed in an earthquake. But the couple, the elderly couple, I think Baucis and Philemon are their names, the wife and the husband, they are preserved, and they're basically given whatever they ask, and they ask that when they die, they won't ever be separated. So when they're old and it's time to die, instead of dying, they become trees, and supposedly those two trees were still there in Phrygia. So this story is known. So basically the idea here is, in this general region, people would tell this story, and when Paul shows up and immediately heals the man who's crippled, everyone is very worried that they will, dishonor the gods and be destroyed, because they know that story from Ovid. But they try to worship Paul and Barnabas, and they say, no, we're only human beings, and that's not maybe the way that they wanted to start preaching, right? We're just mortals like you, but we're bringing you news about God who made everything. So stop worshiping these gods like us or anyone else and worship the one true God. He let you follow your own ways in the past, but now, he's cared for you, and basically they're preaching the gospel. They're preaching the one true God. They haven't even gotten to Christ. You're talking about Jesus. They're just talking about the one true God instead of paganism, because these people are trying to worship them. So I think we see, maybe I'm wrong, but I think we see St. Paul and St. Barnabas a little bit on the back foot. This conversation did not go the way that they expected. And then their opponents, Jews who reject Christ from the other cities, show up and say, no, these guys are troublemakers. So instead of worshiping them, then they actually stone Paul. This is the worst that we've seen Paul experience so far. Stoning, could, and you often would, kill someone. He doesn't die. But he goes, and we presume that he takes some time to recover in the city of Derbe, and then he goes back and visits all the places. So at this point, St. Paul has baptized and established many Gentiles as Christians. Remember that started in Antioch of Pisidia when they preached in the synagogue, and the people received them but then rejected them, and they said, well, now we're going to preach to the Gentiles. You needed to hear it first, but if you reject it, then now God has sent us to the Gentiles. He sent all of us to the Gentiles, but you won't go, so we will. So anyway, that's a little scattered, but I think those are the important things to see in this passage. And then they go back to Antioch, and we'll see what happens from there. Next week is going to be important because from Antioch, they're going to be sent to Jerusalem with an important question of how do the Gentiles who have become Christians, how do they need to deal and approach with the Old Testament, and especially the Torah, the law of Moses. So we'll see you next week. God bless you all.